welcome you here today. I'm glad to have Concert Choir as our performing ensemble. And we hope you learn and listen attentively and enjoy this very excellent presentation. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I'm Peter, and I have ADHD. The inspiration for this document has come from several sources. I taught high school chorus in North Carolina for 7 years at a school where inclusion was the norm rather than an exception. My students came to class with ADHD, autism, dyslexia, auditory processing disorder, and other forms of neurodivergence, as well as other physical disabilities. And that left me feeling unprepared to adequately serve them in an equitable fashion. I've also worked with professional musicians with similar diagnoses, and sometimes had to reconsider my own approaches to planning and implementing rehearsal strategies for performance. While at USC, I've had the pleasure of taking courses with Dr. Alex Carrico on music and disability studies, as well as Dr. Danny Jenkins on pedagogy of music theory. I was able to dig deeper into the topics related to this particular document and realize how much there is left to do. So as I approach my own pedagogy, I value commitment, teamwork, honesty, and understanding, and encourage collaboration through honest discussion and rehearsal, determining collective goals, and realizing student empowerment. I'm a teacher of the whole person because making the best music only occurs when the people involved are invested and enveloped in a community of trust and understanding. Music has long been considered a passive and dynamic means through which a person's spirit and body can be assuaged. From the Psalms of the Hebrew Bible to the writings of Shakespeare to Jean-Marc Gaspard Itaud's early approaches to music therapy, humanity has often found solace through musical expression. Unfortunately, contemporary music education coursework rarely goes beyond a required general course related to teaching special learners, meaning that teachers who graduated from an education program often have little pedagogical framework for students with disabilities in the music classroom. My document advocates for a holistic approach to support neurodivergent learners through a method that will strengthen all students' musical education. So in the years following the passage of the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, now known as IDEA, the landscape of public school education has moved toward a more equitable approach for students with disabilities. IDEA has two major requirements for states and their respective local education agencies. First, to provide a free, appropriate public education to students with disabilities, and second, to offer that education in the least restrictive environment possible. As of the 2020-2021 school year, more than 7.2 million infants, toddlers, adolescents, and other students with disabilities were provided support services through state and local channels. Congress has passed other legislation as well regarding persons with disabilities. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 are two which continue to play an important part in civil rights, educational, and social justice reforms. Judy Singer is credited with the invention of the term neurodiversity in her honors thesis at the University of Sydney in Australia. She says that neurodiversity can be seen as the rejection of a normal means of cognitive function and instead accepting that people process the world in a variety of ways. As a sociologist who has autism, Singer wrote her thesis on the emergence of a new social movement based on neurological diversity. Three of the most recognized forms of neurodivergence, and three that I specifically involved myself with while teaching in high school, are autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and dyslexia. Autism can present in various areas of function like social interaction, measured intelligence, and communication, and have a wide range of variability levels. If you see up here, you can see in this diagram all the different areas of function and the ways in which they can vary from person to person. ADHD can be divided into 3 types: inattentive, which includes aspects of not paying attention to detail, losing objects necessary for task completion, and inability to follow or understand directions. They can be hyperactive impulsive, so they're talking too much, they're fidgeting or squirming and up all the time and interrupting others, or they can be combined. I'm a combined form of ADHD, which is what led me about 12 days after our son was born to go into his nursery as my wife was feeding him and suggest that we should move to London, England so I could teach there instead. It went over very well. Dyslexia is a learning disorder in which a person has difficulty recognizing language, particularly when written, and subsequently has trouble processing the information. This can also lead to issues with spoken language. Other forms of neurodiversity also include dysgraphia, which is where you have trouble writing down particular points of information, and auditory processing disorder, where what you hear is not as easily processed in your brain. Now, if you're on Netflix and you've got the subtitles on like I have on this presentation, that doesn't mean that you have auditory processing disorder. Sometimes that means that you just process things a little bit faster visually than you do with your ears. So many, if not most people, can offer a working definition of the difference between a person's short-term and long-term memory. However, not everyone may be aware that there's a sort of in-between stage, a working memory. Our working memory is designed like short-term in that it can hold small bits or chunks of information for a limited period of time. But it distinguishes itself in that we can also operate on those bits of information and manipulate them for a particular use. For instance, a teacher could ask a choir to sing an ascending and then descending major scale on solfege syllables, then ask them to sing it again while leaving out the 3rd and 6th scale degrees. This requires the students to not only retain the instructions regarding singing the scale, but also to make sure that they have the specific syllables in their mind to audiate them rather than to phonate. Students with ADHD in particular may experience working memory deficits, but those deficits can vary. Students with low working memory often perform well on the first couple of steps of a complex task because those steps are still familiar to them in their memory. But then over time, they lose focus and begin making mistakes or forget important information. With ADHD, performance is a little bit more variable. Those characteristics can also change based on the amount of medication that an ADHD person has, the amount of time that they've been working on a particular task, the amount of sleep, the mood that they're in. All of those things can affect their working memory level. So we have to find ways to support them so that their behavior is more consistent over time. Working hand in hand with our working memory is our cognitive load. So when a person is overwhelmed by the influx of information or unique stimuli and has difficulty processing what they're experiencing, their cognitive load is becoming a burden for their brain. Much like an internet router overtaxed by too many bandwidth requests at once, making every user's connection slower, the brain's working memory can become overloaded by processing requests. Cognitive load is divided into intrinsic and extrinsic loads, respectively handling the inherent difficulty of a task as well as immaterial components that still require the working memory stores. As teachers, it is our challenge to avoid the curse of expertise as we help students build schema to lighten the load. They should be prepared to use various approaches to assist students in organizing the information into easily processed chunks. For us as musicians, that can come in many different forms. When we're first learning about the pitches notated on a staff, we may know every good boy does fine. or we may have learned the order of the circle of fifths over time through a sort of grouping like we would with a phone number. And so there's different aspects of that that we have to consider as educators to make sure that we don't become frustrated with our students for whom a lot of this information is very new and not always easily processable to us. There are a number of considerations for teachers once their class rosters are determined, including their legal obligations to fulfill student accommodations set out by 504s and IEPs, or individualized education plans. Those accommodations may deal with the student's placement within the classroom, all the way to the amount of time that they have to spend in a particular period. When we look up here, we can see some of the different aspects that go into these pedagogical approaches and challenges. So again, a student may have preferred seating because they need proximity to a teacher, either to see them or hear them, or simply feel the instructor's presence. Assistive technology may come into play, and we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. Some students, particularly with autism, may also have a teaching assistant present within their classroom at all times as another means of support. And then again, based on the amount of information and cognitive load that a student has on a particular day, they may or may not require limited time so that they don't become saturated by the stimuli in a rehearsal. Universal design for learning can help teachers better accomplish these objectives in a way that supports all their students. So the first time that I recognized any sort of inequality in our traditional educational paradigm, I was in elementary school. My best friend Maddie is left-handed, and as we moved into curriculum that involved more handwriting, there were times where she became frustrated because the desk that she was writing on was built for someone to write with their right hand. And on top of that, the spiral-bound notebooks and even the loose-leaf paper that we had were all bound together on the left side of the page, which made her writing much more difficult. Universal design for learning has since been applied to things as mundane as desk designs to give all students equitable access to educational materials and resources on a daily basis. So you can see the principles of universal design listed here. This comes originally out of architecture and making public spaces more accessible for people when they're going into a place of business, when they're trying to cross a street, all sorts of things like that. And so these principles, we want the design to be useful and marketable to a person with diverse abilities. We want the design of something to accommodate a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. We need low physical effort, and we need size and space. You can see all of these things and the ways in which they can be applied to what we do as well within the classroom. So universal design has three central and distinct tenets to guide its implementation through multiple means of learning. There's engagement, or the why of learning. For us, that's going to be the motivation to rehearse and perform a particular work. Representation, or the what of learning. For us, the musical content. And then action and expression, the how of learning, or rehearsal and performance techniques. Each tenet also has subcategories that provide greater focus and direction for educators as they build out inclusive approaches through accessibility, building, and internalization. And while existing curricula can be helpful for teachers seeking to implement UDL within their classrooms, their overall design should first and foremost seek to invite students with varying skills and abilities to be engaged throughout the learning process. One of the overarching tenets of universal design is that what can be good for one can be good for all. With these inclusive approaches in mind, high school choir directors can take an active role in making their classrooms more accessible for all learners, while also ensuring that their rehearsal processes are more efficient and inclusive for students with varying levels of cognitive and physical disability. That can take place in the classroom layout and physical space, such as the displays that we might have in a room. At this point, a lot of classrooms, when you walk into, either have a form of a smart board or other projection, or some kind of display area where something that's on a computer can then be displayed on a board in a space that is easily visible for all students. With the manipulability that we have with what we have in choral rehearsal rooms and the necessity of us to sometimes move around, we have to ensure that the space is ready for things to be able to be seen by all students in all spaces. Our rehearsal structure can also take a big part of that, and we'll talk about that soon. We want to be able to offer them systematic feedback. We want to be able to have collaboration rehearsal. We want them to be able to decode things. And so all of the things that we have here as far as pedagogy goes includes all learners. The inclusion of technology in the contemporary choral classroom is a common occurrence, given, again, the proliferation of devices acquired and distributed by education agencies to their corresponding schools. Some places may have Chromebooks that are one-to-one, where students have it throughout the day. Sometimes they can take it home with them. Same thing with iPads or other forms of tablets. There are innumerable opportunities to implement and supplement music through technology, but educators have to discern best practices for the inclusion of such resources. We have an ethical responsibility, as Paul Louth writes, to consider new technologies as media that potentially shift learning toward emancipatory or ideological ends. So there are several different established technologies to help support learning goals. First, we have accessibility features that are already built into a lot of the software that we use. For instance, the closed captioning that's offered within Microsoft's PowerPoint. You can find that across different platforms as well. Some students may require an RF system where an instructor wears a microphone around their neck or on their lapel, and then it broadcasts to an earpiece for a student to be able to better hear a teacher. Teachers may also choose to use portable voice amplifiers that they wear on their person or have a speaker at the front of the room to make their voice more easily heard. Other technology can include things like PlayScore 2, which is an application that some musicians will use to be able to help learn a particular score if their literacy skills aren't as high, or again, if they have trouble visually processing a score, such as if they have dyslexia. Fourscore is something that many students and many professional musicians use at this point in time because of what they're able to do with marking up their own scores in a PDF digital version that makes portability easier for them, as well as being able to highlight their own individual part and make the markings that mean the most to their brain. And again, these are just a few examples of what's out there as far as educational media goes and assistive technology. Over the past quarter century, educators, researchers, and scientists have continued to build frameworks for educating learners with cognitive and physical disabilities in the least restrictive environment. Alice Hamlin of James Madison and Virginia Commonwealth Universities has published Teaching Music to Students with Special Needs, a label-free approach, as well as Teaching Music to Students with Autism through Oxford University Press. One of the other things that Dr. Hamill has also created now is, as you can see there, a practical resource. So not only some theoretical approaches, but then also some things that teachers can take and implement with their own pedagogy immediately. Stephen Seek's Teaching with Respect, Inclusive Pedagogy for Choral Directors includes a chapter on students with disabilities, and Alice Andero of Florida State has also contributed research in the Oxford Handbook of Social Justice and Music Education. Our own Dr. Alex Kiriko just released a new book that's come out this year, Disability and Accessibility in the Music Classroom, that includes a discussion of universal design as well as ways to center disability so that it becomes the norm rather than the exception. Educators who adopt the tenets of universal design for learning will give themselves and their students far greater chances for success than those who simply abide by the tenets laid out by their LEA. So, within our pedagogical applications, what can we do to support our students? The first is to have a clear, concise rehearsal structure. We welcome the students in every morning. The expectations are on the display or on the board, where we can say, here's our rehearsal order, here's what we're trying to accomplish. We want to have a warm-up, and it's imperative that teachers have a predetermined plan for each of these things so that pieces can be approached with specific focuses for effective retention. More than a century's worth of research has shown that the first and last things encountered during any period of learning are best retained, with everything else in the middle between those bookends relegated to a lower level of preservation. So what we see first and what we see last are the things we remember most easily. Everything in the middle takes a little bit more processing power for us. So with that in mind, teachers might want to hold off on completing administrative tasks like taking up money for a trip, passing out forms like that, until a point later in the rehearsal where maybe you stop singing for a minute, but it's also going to lighten their cognitive load in that time as well. For systematic feedback, what can we do to be collaborative and encouraging? We can do three things. We can say, here's what we're doing well, here's what we can improve on, and here's how we can improve it. When students come to expect that level of feedback, they know that by the end of it, they're going to have an operational piece of information that they can implement the next time that the rehearsal begins. Collaboration in rehearsal can take different forms. When I was teaching, one of the things that we did was trying to figure out something besides this sort of gesture, which has come to mean the universal sign for diction and clear consonants. That doesn't seem to be terribly effective, and so I made an assignment for our students. They had to justify it on their own and give a 30-second elevator pitch as to why they thought their particular approach was effective. And so we had a student, Samuel, who decided that this particular gesture was the one for him. It's very distinct and not anything that you've ever seen from a choral director before, and he said that means crisp, and all of our consonants need to be crisp. And he even emphasized the K sounds as he did that. And when you think about it, it's not terribly far off from what we use as the sign language for the letter K either. So in that way, we started to implement that when I was teaching, and that gave us a moment of collaboration. Decoding symbols is also an important thing. Music literacy is a basic foundational part of what we do as teachers, and making sure that students understand everything on the page is an essential part of our job. So one of the other things that we have to be able to do then is apply these things within our rehearsals and select the repertoire that we're trying to implement within each particular rehearsal and for performances. So we can activate the body, mind, and breath and voice in exercises and warm-up that prepare singers for the technical and expressive aspects of the repertoire that they're about to rehearse. Teachers should have an established warm-up routine to breed familiarity for all students, while at the same time being cautious to not use the same exercises in the same order day after day, so as to avoid a sense of going through the motions instead of having that intentional focus. These exercises help neurodivergent students to build and strengthen their schemas related to technical aspects of performance that can be transferred between pieces in rehearsal. Doing this at the outset of class in a low-stakes environment further helps the students process the information without the burden of other information from earlier in the lesson. So with the repertoire that we're singing today, there are different approaches that we have used already in rehearsal and that can be used by directors going forward. Jenny Rebecca involves a lot of singing on the syllable do for the altos, tenors, and basses. So having them sing that from the outset can be helpful to not only rehearse what they're already going to be doing, but to ensure that they're not overly concerned by the text that's involved. Another thing that they can do is to keep the steady beat by tapping somewhere on their body. That can be a particularly helpful exercise not only for all students across the board, but particularly for students with ADHD or autism, for whom stimming, where they tap on their body anyway or have flapping hands, things like that, that can be something that they translate into their own music making as well. Kids Song has mixed meter, and while setting a bunch of familiar children's songs, it disrupts their schema in the sense that what they expect to come next rhythmically often is not the case. And so finding ways for students to be able to keep the mixed meter in their mind and knowing what's coming next is an essential approach for us as well. For the Maddalena Caggiolana madrigal Come fra ver erbetta, we have an Italian Renaissance madrigal that may be somewhat of an unfamiliar vocal style for students who have not previously been introduced to Renaissance polyphony. And so we have to find ways for their ears to become better attuned to that as well. That can be a challenge for students with ADHD to make sure that they know what's going on and when it's going on. So intentional rehearsal is essential for that. High school students with little to no experience with French diction may find the prospect of singing the language of direton, which is French, particularly daunting, but this can be overcome with intentional approaches by directors through proper score study and communication. Most directors will have familiarity with the International Phonetic Alphabet and can transcribe the text into IPA symbols that are easier for students to process. But one of the other things that we can do is we can provide a recording of it as well for students to be able to go back and listen to for reference. And we can also have them do some passive learning where the IPA is up on the board or on the display even as they come into the classroom. So even as they're getting their materials together, there's an extra visual reminder for those students. Within Ryan Kelly's edition of Happy We have the proliferation of dynamic markings that go across sections of work to create intensity within different attempts at the text or different enlivenings of a repetitive text. In these instances, teachers may choose to call out the dynamic level of a forthcoming phrase as students finish the preceding one. However, this can be distracting for some students as well. So using particular marking tools, whether that's something with Fourscore or whether that's a particular code that the students and teachers come up with, can also be an effective means to ensure that those scores are marked properly to remind the students of what's yet to come. In When Memory Fades, the strophic framework of the hymn provides singers with recurring rhythmic patterns that often find the alto, tenor, and bass parts moving concurrently while the soprano part sings the melody. All four parts sing the melody at some point in the work, so the teachers would do well to encourage the entire choir to sing at the beginning so they have familiarity and then are able to enliven the text through stressed and unstressed syllables. In Hark I Hear the Harp's Eternal, visually, the rhythms that are notated can be difficult for the students to actualize on first glance. And so rote teaching can have tremendous value for students in those particular instances. So what? If you're a trained, experienced choral music educator, most of the things that I've just talked about are going to sound like best practices. These suggestions are made in the hopes that teachers will reconsider their pedagogy to ensure that all students are exposed to equitable methods for learning and performing music. It's my hope that as research continues, more information will be gathered related to neurodivergent students and educators in the choral classroom. And even with strides made in the past 2 decades, we have educators who continue to report feeling a lack of preparedness to support students through inclusive opportunities, both as far as physical and cognitive disabilities are concerned. Perhaps most importantly, there's a dearth of pedagogical research that gives neurodivergent educators and students an opportunity to express their views on the contemporary educational landscape. Ethnographic research must become a priority for music education scholars to ensure that educators and students alike are beneficiaries of forward-thinking approaches that maximize the potential of every second spent in a classroom. When we accomplish these things, all our students are given every opportunity to succeed, and we make music from the heart. So the program that you're about to hear now, and I'll invite concert choir to begin moving up at this time. The program that you're going to hear is a life cycle concert, because again, as educators, we talk about what can we do to serve all of our students whenever possible, and how long can they practice their craft. And for us, we hope that singing is a lifelong endeavor, far beyond the time that our students step out of the classroom. So with that in mind, this concert is presented as a life cycle, beginning with a song to Jenny Rebecca, a 4-day-old daughter, and ending with the hope of what is to come after our physical death occurs. Thank you so much, and I hope that you enjoy the program.
Holy